what we got? The clarification group, is that right?
Clarification.
Yeah. Clarification. What questions of clarification would you like us to address?
Well, first off, I come from a vocational background, vocational education background, so which much of it is sort of modeled as the instructor as sort of disseminator of information. Okay. And so now talking about how these two theories, if we can call both of them that, come together. Mesereau talks about the sort of binary conception of instrumental and communicative learning. Instrumental meaning how to do something or how to perform. So as a vocational educator, I've always been interested in sort of that area. For example, if a 50-year-old student returns for a 2-year technical degree in electricity, and they take, electricity 101 building circuit. It's very how to do this, how to perform that. There's not this sort of, it's very difficult to model that type of classroom as sort of learner-centered, instructor as this sort of facilitator guiding people in the right direction rather than disseminator of information. Bridging these two together now, if we take Andragogy as this learner-centered, lack of structure, sort of anti-instructor as the giver of information. How do the unification of these two address what I've always thought neither one can address either?
Well, I think it's a great question, and you outlined it very well, Kevin. But think about that electrician who's learning how to repair that circuit or learning how to work that circuit. And he's working out in the real world someplace. What if he encounters something that doesn't fit what he learned? That he encounters a problem with no clear solution. By implementing a little bit of creativity and imagination in conjunction with his structure, he could probably solve the problem. If he's so worried about how he learned it and that information remained exclusively intact, he's going to probably be on the phone to his boss, something like that. But with some imagination, he could solve the problem himself, and in that way probably boost his own confidence and competency in the field.
I'd like to respond to you on a little bit different level. And that is that I don't see Andragogy as being anti-structure.
Do you catch that?
Because Andragogy really is not a content structure, which is what we really think of as structure. It is a process structure to engage in active learning about that. And I would say that if we're doing electricity for an electrician that's coming in, what about allowing all of that information to be laid out and available, pieces of it that they may already have, and allowing them to take a hold of that and say, now, here's the problem that you need to address. You come up with what your solution is, and let's see what you do with it. And at the point where they take one or two steps into that, and do what may be an incomplete addressing of it, then's when the facilitator, the teacher, can respond and say, well, have you thought about this piece? Where does this come into the whole structure of what you're trying to address? And move it from there.
I think such an approach leans very heavily on the idea of learner as self-directed. It leans very heavily on that. In my experience as a vocational educator, I think if I would take that approach, I would have certain students who would run with that approach,
yes,
and others who would almost feel paralyzed.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I agree with that, and the fact is, or the question that I would raise then, what are you as an instructor going to do about that? Run away from that and say this is the safe place over here? Or am I going to allow the ones that would take a hold of that and run with that, move in that direction, and then say, now what do I need to do in order to move in the direction of facilitating the learning of those who are scared of that kind of thing? And that's a decision that one needs to make at that particular point.
Right. You might want to break them into smaller groups, for example, and those that are more receptive mix those that are a little more hesitant in with that crowd. that's basically what Mesereau in his first principle refers to as a disorienting dilemma. It's an obstacle that once you move forward, you see there's real learning in that, and you can apply that to any situation in your life. So when you encounter a difficult obstacle, it could be something as simple as being stuck in traffic, and maybe you're, have been a victim of road rage, something like that, and you respond back to it. And just by saying, okay, I feel like I'm not going to respond that way, there's learning in that. Just as when that person is encountering something, sitting down with this group, gee, I don't know if I could be creative about it with the help of others from an neurological approach, could then overcome that and say, okay, that's making a little bit of sense to me, I'll try that.
Right.
Without the instructor telling them how to do it. The instructor couldn't tell them how to do it.
Enrique,
Yes.
I'd like to build on that.
Yes.
Is it an either-or situation? We have a continuum of teaching and learning contexts. One end is more self-directed, one end is perhaps more teacher-directed. For part of a learning time with learners, can I work in a more efficient teacher-directed to get them to a point where they are knowledgeable and safe in what they're doing?
Right.
And then say, okay, we've got some problems, we're going to introduce this. We're going to move to a problem base. Now we're going to move to a more self-directed problem base. So I don't think it has to be either or. I think you can blend where you need to.
Like
I mean, I don't want to send a beginning student in electricity into a lab and say, we'll figure it out. And they go, whoa,
Right.
I figured it out. I don't want to learn that way anymore.
Part of what I was saying also is that you have information there as part of the structure of what they're looking at as far as their process. That kind of, okay? How about the rebuttal or the disagreement?
I would say that probably our difficulties lie with missing a lot of pieces of the process. You start out with a delineation of the aspects on andragogy. We needed a similar delineation of the pieces of transformative learning. Then we need a presentation, a table, a taxonomy, a model, or something that shows how you have integrated these two. And then we need to say, okay, now what do you draw from that? There's a big gap. The presentation slides left pieces out in between, and so those of us that have read and understand transformative theory, we can fill in the pieces. Those that, to a certain extent, those that haven't, can't, and we still aren't sure just where you say they coalesce. Well, show us where do they coalesce, and then we can move on from there.
Okay, I want to respond to that, the issue of the transformative kinds of things. I was going through a transformation in my own life long before Mesereau's transformational theory ever appeared in published or expressed form.
So did I.
Absolutely. We know about that.
Yes, we do.
And the issue that I'm trying to look at is look at transformation in your own life. If you don't have all of the pieces up there and so on and so forth that has to do with transformative learning, look at what transformation has gone in your own life and say, how do I put this together? What would I say in response of the incomplete information that I had in order to address that kind of thing? And to me, that's part of what is the most valuable stuff. Edward C. Lindeman said the most untapped resource that we have as far as adult learners are concerned is the analysis of their own experience.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, in terms of making a statement about there being a model, or that this is happening, we need to see that.
Yeah.
Those pieces.
We understand that, but
Right.
we don't have the model. We are making a first step toward addressing the model.
Well, then I'm not
Your point
sure
is well taken.
then I'm not sure that you can say that they coalesce until you've shown what the pieces are and that they do.
Well, what I meant that, what I was saying that they coalesce is that they're both self-directed concepts.
Now, in terms of some of the assumptions and some of the, we were discussing that. It makes sense. It comes out of a similar way of looking at things and working with adults, or understanding, not working, but understanding how adults learn. That part makes sense, yes. But then when we get to the bigger pictures of these things, okay, there's a lot of pieces that are.
Well, a lot of the bigger pictures, that's the bigger pieces, that's true. But I think it's very, very important, and I've been to the TLC a number of times now, and one thing that keeps reappearing over and over again in the literature is that Meserov's principles 1 through 10, if it's not a paint by numbers approach.
Nor an Andragogy paint by numbers.
Very true.
And see, if you run that risk too when you have those lists, yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Assumptions and any process elements, absolutely.
I understand that, but nevertheless, you still have to have those pieces to start with, and then you do like John suggests, then you back up and say, okay, now talk about your own experience. Then all of a sudden, it takes on new perspective.
Right.
Yeah, that all makes sense, but there's still gaps.
Okay,
So-
Very good.
All right, how about the problems of practical application? Let's hear about those.
Okay. You spoke earlier about losing authority in the classroom and expecting the students to take responsibility. Can you tell us how you would do that in a classroom of undergraduate students who are used to pedagogical methods of teaching and have an attitude of, just tell me what I need to know to pass this course, and they get angry when you ask them to do some of the work?
Well, I'll tell you, I teach that class right now at NIU, and I've taught it for 6 years there. And the first day of class, they're dumbfounded, because I step to the podium as if I'm going to deliver a traditional lecture. And I teach undergraduates. And they're sitting there with their ho-hum, okay, teach me, look on, first day of class, waiting for what they expect. And I look out at them and I say, okay, let's push the desks to the side. And right away, all their senses go on high alert. They say, this guy's got a different approach to stuff. The first time I taught this class, it was on form of transformative learning. It was also based on theater improvisation. I developed my own theory called the ITAP, improvisational theater art form, experiential type learning. Anyway, after the first semester, there were so many students that were interested in this, because as you say, they've never been exposed to anything like this before, that I would have two student assistants. So on the first day of class on the second semester, I'm sitting in the back reading the Northern Star newspaper, and we wait until 5 minutes after class is supposed to start. And then my two assistants, that everyone else assumes are just regular students, create some kind of commotion. Where's that teacher? He should be here by now. Where's Dr. Elsey? Why is he not in this classroom? And everyone is just blown away. They've never seen any, and it heightens and it heightens and it builds. And somewhere, they're like looking at the door, they won't flee the classroom. What do I do? And then I stand up and I say, well, welcome to Cal 492. And they're like, oh, it's like, they applaud. It's a relief. It's that juxtaposition of being afraid and relief and knowing that it's cool and that it's safe. And that's how I do it.
I often look at it as giving the students a voice, and a lot of undergraduate students don't realize they're allowed to do that.
Or that they even have one. That's
Yes.
right. Exactly.
A couple of things I would do. One is I would ask them to reflect on the biggest changes that they have made in the last year or two. Focus on whatever it is. Now ask yourself the question, how did I go about that? Who was involved in that? Did I do it all by myself? Did I go to somebody and say, tell me what to do? How did I go about that? And ask them to reflect on the steps of making the change that is the most important change they've made in the last year or so. And afterward, when they share their views on that, they share what their changes were, so forth, then I would come back to them and say, now, it appears to me that most of what you're talking about was done on a self-directed basis. Mm-hmm. You're much more self-directed than what you thought you were when you heard that word. The other thing is that I've had I had two students, one at my former institution, one at the present institution. The former institution said, well, it's all right for you to stand there and say in your ivory tower that everything can be carried on in self-directed learning, but I want you to know it doesn't work that way in the real world. had to decide how am I going to respond to that. I either say, be quiet or I'll flunk you, or I address the issue.
Right.
And we happened to, for 45 minutes, as the rest of the class looked on, address that issue. And I said, because of my stance on self-directed learning, it's because of that I believe you have every right to say what you have just said. And we dealt with that, to work through that. And it was not basically until about 4 or 5 years later that I had a letter from that lady who said, you transformed my life at that point. You were right. And she said, I didn't realize it at the time. The other instance at my institution that I'm at right now, Lindenwood, the first class I did on building blocks for adult learning foundation. Professor of marketing that said, well, I don't know why I'm here, but I'm here, and we'll see what happens. And it wasn't until at the end of the first class that he went back to his marketing class and came back the next week and said, I tried this thing that we did in class, and here's how it worked. And that became a pattern for that person on a weekly basis to come back, because he never experienced that kind of an approach before. And he saw value in what he learned at one point in one class to carry that out right in his own classes.
I hope you wrote back to the woman and told her that you didn't transform her life.
What?
I hope you wrote back to the woman and told her that you did not transform her life.
Absolutely.
Okay. Because, because that's what we have to understand. We create the opportunities, and without us doing that, it may not happen.
That's right.
But the transformative, and so when I get really put off by literature that says, well, okay, we're transforming people. We're only opening up channels.
I pointed out to her that experience was part of the transformation of your life.
Because it was her decision where she went with it then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. What about another one? You got another thing you want clarification on, or have we exhausted your?
Yeah, I think that was pretty much all we had.
Okay. Okay. All right.
We hit all our cylinders.
And how about this? How about this group?
One of the things that I've noticed with my students is that when we get to, kind of like what you were talking about with vocational things, issues that they see as being very content heavy or very skill heavy, quantum physics, they don't understand that they can do that in an andragogical or transformative learning process. And it's something that I haven't really pushed on them, although I left a class the other night and I said, here's the question. I said, could you facilitate a group of people who understood quantum physics? Could you facilitate their learning more about it? And I just left them with that. I don't know how, to be continued. But I am curious.
You're going to find out what their answer is, right?
Yes, yeah. I'd be curious, if you all have some particular approaches you take for helping people who are teaching in content or vo-tech.
Well, I can tell you that what I've done, I've had physics majors in my class,
Mm-hmm.
and in fact, as the class developed and the word got around, I'd get people that came from more exclusively pragmatic fields, the sciences, physics, astronomy, and what I had them do was work in different kinds of metaphors, so that they would have another perspective to understand how atoms react to each other, for example. And they might actually become a proton or a neutron and then interact. It's something that's very entertaining, but also simultaneously gives you a different perspective. You see the difference there that gets your head out of the textbook and a different way to look at it. So that when you're reading your text, you think about, wow, we did this crazy exercise where actually we played a proton. But while I was doing that, I'm thinking like a proton. Well, what does a proton think like? I mean, how often would a physics person even maybe consider that point? But you can see how that would be one way to gives you something to think about next time you come.
Love it.
Our time is about up, isn't it? All right.